Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. We're having a retro film revival here at our little speakeasy, so settle in and enjoy Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are a... Welcome back, listeners, to our little speakeasy, retro revivaling. We're bringing it back. Oh, go ahead, yeah.
What kind of liquor is... What is a polar bear's favorite kind of liquor?
I'm thinking something with Coca-Cola.
Bourbon.
I love that. That's so cute.
More dad jokes to come. Welcome back, everybody.
We are opening up our speakeasy once again for the second round of retro revivaling. But first, before we get into the topic or movie at hand, I hear, Whiskey, you got a little side topic for us to discuss.
Yeah, serious stuff. And I'm sure you remember, it's been a few weeks, but I randomly messaged you in the night being like, I know what my mini topic is going to be for the next weekend.
And I was like, oh my God, yes. And you're like, it's not that. I'm like, oh, I remember that conversation. And I also love
how I said, it's been a long week, because I said weekend. No, so next show. Yeah, so this is it's going to be old news as of when this is out, but it's already old news, sort of. It's ongoing old news. So we've talked on the show about how stunt performers are not well respected, and how that is a very... Frankly, after you hear this story, I think you're going to be a little bit more mad about how that new, casting director Academy Award, it's beyond...
My mom calls it just, so the SAG Award...
Basically, it's just after. So I was watching my news programs, my Tucker Carlson. No, not.
Oh
really.
My God.
So I was watching some news, and one story that was covered was about stunt performers and how it is apparently a job with a 100% injury risk rate.
Oh yeah, I believe that.
So 100% of stunt performers will be injured at some point, which there's no other job in any other field like that. It might not be quote unquote the most dangerous job, because an injury could be anything, but you will be injured. If you're working on an oil rig or something, if you get injured, it could be a big problem, but there's not 100% chance. If you go to war, there is not 100% chance you're gonna get an injury. It's just crazy. And going into it, there's more to it than that. So I remembered, I wrote down that was a story, and I looked it up, and I'm mainly gonna be going off of a article that I found, because a bunch of people were covering this, but this article seemed pretty comprehensive, and it was written by a stunt performer. So it's called The Dirty Secret of Stunt Work, a Job with a 100% Injury Rate, by Kirk Canet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Maybe we'll add this in the link in the description or something.
Right.
But so he's a stunt performer, and he published this on moviemaker.com. Currently he is a stunt... I think he directed it too, but he's a stunt performer in a streaming film coming out called American Badger. But anyway, with these stunt performance injuries, this is anything from head injuries, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, suicide, hypothermia, heat stroke, chemically induced autoimmune disease. And what's interesting about this, and kind of what makes... Because... Again, when you obviously, if you're going to jump off a building or drive a flaming car or something, you're probably going to get injured. Right. But what's interesting that was covered in the news thing that I saw weeks ago and talked about in this article is that, insurance for cast and crew does not necessarily cover stunt performers. So if you get injured... Ooh. The production's probably just going to leave you out to dry. I hope you have health insurance. I hope you can cover this yourself.
That's awful. I mean, the whole point of them doing it is they're supposed to be doing it in a, relatively safer environment. So, I mean, I don't understand how they could be completely left out of, like you said, the what's the word I'm looking for? Be completely left out of the insurance thing, because I do feel like, the production is still responsible for providing a safe work environment.
So as we know, especially executives love to find really sleazy ways of making loopholes and things. And so here's the reason they're able to. So it's cast and crew, right? Main players. So stunts are not considered main cast. If you're a stunt performer, you might be doing all of the cool stuff, but you are not considered part of the main cast. And neither is any of the stunt work. That is essentially fun movie facts for any of you guys who listen to the show and might not know. I'm sure movie people know this already, but so when you're watching the credits, waiting for that post-credit Marvel scene, I'm sure a lot of people notice second unit, and second unit has director and like basically all of the same positions as the first unit, which would be the main movie. So second unit is stunts. If it's in a movie that doesn't have like stunts per se, it's like footage of like a car driving or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But anything where you do not need the actors to be there. So it could be the hero riding on a horse in like a wide shot, and you just get like a double to put on a wig and stuff and do that. But so in action heavy movies like Fast and the Furious, Marvel movies, just like anything that requires a lot of second unit work, this could be up to 30% of the movie. And it's just funny that this is like so, I'm talking about stunt performers, but again, like there's something really laughable about like now the next Academy Award is basically going to another executive, when this is like a whole section of the movie that is not being represented whatsoever. Even in movies with like a lot of visual effects and stuff, there's an Academy Award for that. Like bringing up Marvel again, or like any other effects heavy movie these days, you have like hundreds of animators working to like do the CGI for something, and they might be kind of nameless drones just working on that, but at least there's some recognition for that department. There's nothing for like I think it should be for stunt performers, but like this whole section is just not represented whatsoever. So
why are they so afraid of giving stunt people recognition? I mean,
and here's the other thing. So like
that's
this is
the part that sells a bunch of these movies, is the awesome stunts. Like I thought that's literally what the entire point of the Mission Impossible franchise was, is it has an awesome stunt in it.
There's like a whole subgenre of like movies where it's all about how cool the stunt performer is. Like we just had the new Ryan Gosling movie that ended up doing okay. Like it was bombing, and then I think the Fall Guy is what I'm talking about. So, but that was like a whole movie about how the stunt performer is actually the cool guy, and the main actor is lame and he's into crime, and like that's one movie. But then like kind of on the grittier crime side of things, there was Drive, also with Ryan Gosling. He plays a stuntman a lot, but that was like more of like a gritty crime film. But once again, the stuntman is like really cool and like pulling off heists in his off time and stuff. So it's just funny, like in the medium, we kind of revere stunt performers as being like these really cool, awesome, like whoa, you get to like do badass things for a job. But it's like very it's it's a very thankless job, and people don't even recognize you because you're essentially looking like the main actor in something. But so I mentioned how insurance will often not cover them. Another thing that is just rampant is accidents go underreported, because if you get a head injury, which happens very frequently, or something else, basically they don't want to lose work. It's kind of like if they report that they're injured frequently, they get kind of, oh, this person's hard to work with, or they complain a lot or something. So, and at one point, Kirk, like when he was talking about this, he had a little anecdote. He didn't name the friend, but he said that one of his best friends in the stunt industry, there was a point where his safety line broke and he fell 30 feet off of a bridge, breaking every bone in one half of his body.
Oh my God.
And his friend did not report that injury.
That's wild. Jeez, he wanted to go through all that pain. I mean, he didn't want to. He felt he needed to, just so he can keep getting work. That's awful.
right? And so, and that too. So, oh, well, how the other thing that he kind of talks about in this article, the 100%, where's that statistic coming from? Like, how do you know 100% of stunt performers get an injury? Are you just, is this
Somebody
anecdotal
knows.
evidence? Is this just, no. So he said, so he got this statistic from the Union of British Columbia Performers. So there are 500 in this particular union. There are 560 stunt performers, and all of them, all 560, have reported an injury at some point. So that is the 100% that he's going from. And as I said, this is like this whole kind of sweeping under the rug thing. This was reported on by a whole bunch of different publications. This one just seemed pretty comprehensive. Also, good title, The Dirty Secrets of Stunt Work.
I like that title. Well, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the reason why the Academy doesn't want to acknowledge, the contributions of stunt people is basically because if they did, then they'd have to fix things, and they don't want to do that. And the people who vote on the stuff for the Academy members are usually the people who hold the money and the purse strings and everything else. That's one of the reasons why Harvey Weinstein was able to get away with what he did as often as he did and still win so many awards.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of crossover with that. And there's even some crossover, because another thing I'm sure you are well aware of, because it's been in the news for at least the last decade, and I even saw, like, a YouTuber I watched did a whole thing about it, but CTE from concussions has been a big thing in the contact sports industry with football players and MMA fighters. And if anyone listening doesn't know what CTE is, it is scary stuff. It pretty much, like, you become a different person. Your brain rots from inside your head. It is gnarly. And
didn't our alma mater end up with Aaron Hernandez's brain? For some reason, I'm thinking
maybe. Well, and this, the crazy thing about CTE, I completely forgot about until watching this YouTuber's thing. You can't get diagnosed with it because, well, like, they can't diagnose you when you're alive, because the only way for them to know for sure if you have it is a post-mortem examination of your brain. So when you die,
rabies.
Yeah, right? So, like, after you die, they have to cut open your head and see if your brain looks like a mess.
Does it look pink and healthy?
Right, well, that's the thing, too. Like, many listeners who maybe have not heard, maybe you're like us and you just prefer movies over sports and you don't really follow the news too much, but, like, when I say your brain is rotting from inside your head, I am not mincing words. Like, if you see what a CTE brain looks like, it's scary. It's also, like, scary that this is just from concussions. Like, this is just from hitting your head. Like, like, football players get this stuff all the time. Like, which it makes sense. It's your brain is getting rattled around, but it's just crazy. But as you can imagine, concussions happen very frequently on film sets because, it's a lot worse than fighting MMA or, even a stunt like, oh, you got to fall down the stairs or something, and we have to do like 40 takes. And sometimes they can get clever and, like, maybe put on a helmet that looks like a wig or something, maybe if it's a long shot or whatever. But, like, when you, again, think of your favorite action movie and think of, I wonder if there was probably a head injury in this. Like, I'm pretty sure all of you can probably think of something. So one good thing that has kind of come out of the reporting of that through sports is concussion protocols are starting to be put in place, but only recently. And only because of the spillover attention from the sports media reporting on CTE with, like, football players and stuff. But at least that's, like, a good change. But again, like, if this was not something that was already, and that's the whole thing too with sports, is they have been kind of slow to get with the times with how to treat this sort of stuff. It's crazy.
It's basically it wasn't until the public attention got big enough that they couldn't ignore it. I mean, that's why there was that joke for the longest time that, oh, you're so hurt, even the NFL wouldn't clear you to play.
Right?
But yeah, it's basically until there's enough public attention and outcry over it, there's not going to change, because that's literally the only thing that can cause these big things to change is outward appearance and outward, basically outward appearance. That's basically what I need to say. How you look from the outside.
Absolutely. And so going back to what I said about underreported injuries, concussions are the one that is the most underreported because, it's pretty invisible. It's not gonna necessarily be obvious if you have one. You might, look a little confused or whatever, but because, again, of being like afraid of losing work, and also because concussions are not exactly very hard to get as far as injuries go. Even easier to get a concussion than like breaking a bone or something like that. It's like the one that is most underreported because of the fear of losing work.
Yeah, I can see that. And then they can't even fall asleep.
Yeah, it's crazy. But so then this article kind of ends with a bunch of different calls to action that Kirk suggests. But yeah, like this. There's a reason I like randomly messaged you while I was hearing this story, because it's like, wow, we've been talking about stunt performers being underappreciated for a long time on this show, but I didn't realize just stuff like not having insurance for injuries for stunt performers, or even like the point about second unit. It was kind of one of those things where when I heard about that, I'm like, yeah, that is true, especially like the movies that get a lot of box office revenue. You recently, we both saw like Twisters, and that's one that's got to be pretty stunt heavy.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of CG in that movie, but there's a lot of driving and stuff. And, it's one of those things you don't really think about because you get caught up in, Travis chasing those tornadoes, but that's not Travis driving the car. Okay. And then they've got to do all those dangerous things where they make it look like it's getting sucked up into a cyclone.
Okay. First off, I'm 98% sure that it's Tyler, but I get what you're saying. Travis is the one that Taylor Swift is dating. Tyler is the one that's in the movie. But
okay.
Played by Glenn.
No, Powell. You're right. It's there we go. It's been 3 weeks. Tyler Owens, you're right.
I'm sorry. I'm already into my cocktail, so I'm finding everything hilarious. But
there you go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's just not even just from the recognition standpoint, like having an Oscar, but just the understanding that. And I've always kind of had an issue with Hollywood being a gig industry, but I kind of get it. I kind of understand why it is. But when it's the point, like, it's not like, the stunt performers can, like, just go to HR at the studio, say I need to take medical leave, get their, guaranteed leave or whatever to heal, and then come back and still have the same work. There is no, because... that's why that's blackballing and stuff is a thing. If you get injured too many times, people just stop calling.
Well, and he made a really good point. He listed a bunch of other ways that you could raise awareness about stunt performing and things like that. But when he got into the Oscar section of, that would be a really good new category, he made a really good point that I think is also kind of goes with what you're saying about that. There's not a lot of star power, right? So one thing that people who do watch the Oscars and care about it and stuff, like a face is connected to the work that's being honored, right? Like right. A lot of people mostly care about like the acting and stuff because that's everyone's favorite celebrities. But like, for instance, in the most recent Oscars, someone who won, who I was rooting for, was the editor of Oppenheimer, Jennifer. Oh my goodness, it's been a few months. But it's one of those things too, where like Oppenheimer, I don't think a lot of people would have pictured that a woman edited that movie. And not just like a woman, but a pretty young woman. I think she's kind of like close to our age, or at least in her 30s. At least she looked like it. But like now, when I think
girl.
Of like,
her name is Jennifer Lame. Poor girl.
That's what it was. I was chanting lame before she won. Probably got bullied, but I don't know. It's a memorable name, which is why I was frustrated that I wasn't remembering it. But yeah, Jennifer Lame. But my point is, like, now I've got a face to match with who edited Oppenheimer.
Right.
And the fact that she won makes that face, like, connect even more. And if stunt performing was a category, like, best, it would probably go to, like, the second unit team. But, like, let's pretend it went to the stunt performer, like the double of Tom Cruise has his own stunts. But you know what I mean. Like, if Let me see, Ryan Gosling, for instance. Like, if his double for Fall Guy like was nominated for an Oscar and won, you'd remember, oh, that's Ryan Gosling's stunt double. It's whatever his name is, and you'd have like a face to match with it, and you would remember this guy. And if he got like injured on the set of a movie, you'd, oh wow, that happened. So like that was something Kirk kind of talked about in the article that I think is kind of true too, and I think is why they are dodging adding it as a category, because once these people become as known as the actors they're portraying, then their leverage is going to go up.
That's See, that's also probably one of the things. What is that quote from Milk that I like? They vote for us 2-1 if they know just one of us. It's the same principle. It's like once you put a face to it, and it's somebody you recognize or you've seen before, it's the same idea. People now
exactly
they know they're on your side, and so you're right. And I actually didn't think about that, but you're right. That'll give them too much leverage, because then there would be like the superstars of the stunt world, and if they're like the best at what they do, I'm sure there's already maybe a little bit of a pay bump, or I don't know how big the pay bump would be, but if you're like known to be really good, but then if like the world knows you're really good, you can really kind of leverage that, because then people will know that your stunts will be in the movie, and I don't think that's what they want you to know. And I think it also helps. It also helps.
It could upend.
Protect.
It could upend a lot of things as well too, because like of the people, because there are actors who got famous because they were sort of like stunt people. Like Jackie Chan is one who, he was just sort of a dude in Chinese film. Like he starred in a lot of movies, but it was because he did his own stunts, and his stunts were amazing, that he became like an A-list actor. And then you kind of have people working backwards too. Like Tom Cruise started off as like an actor, but then he got addicted to nearly dying.
Yeah.
And now it's like, now he does his own stunts, and that's like a thing. But because of that, people know him. And I feel like that could happen too, is once you put a face to the people doing the stunts, and they get popular, why would you hire Ryan Gosling? You know what I mean? If his double becomes as popular, if not more than him,
right?
And people think he's cooler because, well, he's doing the hard work. Like Ryan Gosling's there to look pretty and be charismatic, but his double is the one jumping off the building. I'd rather watch his double in a movie.
Right. Well, Tom Cruise will still have a career, because that's all he wants to be known for.
Oh, exactly. Well, and it also kind of reminds me, there's a Tarantino film, Death Proof, where I guess he was friends with her. Like, so I don't know if you've seen the film, but there's like a very extended car chase in like pretty much the second half of the movie. And one of the actresses was a working stunt woman, and she, I believe, is playing herself essentially, because she's playing a stunt woman. The whole thing is that she does they've got this really nice classic car, and she wants to do a thing where she like climbs on the hood of it for like, a thrill.
Yeah.
But she is a stunt woman, and she is doing the stunt. And I remember when I saw that film, I was like, this chick's cool. Who is she? And and the thing is, she is acting in his movie. Like, she is, as I said, essentially playing herself, but she's acting pretty well. So I was kind of thinking, like, man, why isn't she an actress?
Yeah.
like cut out the extra paycheck and just have her do the movie. So I feel like there is a bit of a fear that this will like upend the industry a bit if they give them more attention.
But everybody says the industry is not working the way it is now anyway, so why is that a problem?
Right? It feels almost like it's not. It's got to be on purpose. Yeah. At this point, like hearing about all of this stuff, and and again, like Kirk, this is more our speculation. Kirk had like a couple of. We should link the article, but he was speculating on a couple of ways to like raise awareness, get people more into like stunt performing and caring about the stunt performers without making it like a big angry yelling political issue or whatever. But like with all of this and just like thinking about it and how much of a point it is that the second unit of movies really has never been a subject for people to care about. It really, and with what we just said about like, I mean, if these performers got famous, I do think that would be a problem. It's like, well, why should we even hire actors then? Like if they don't do their own stunts in these movies.
Yeah.
So at least to me, I feel like they're doing it on purpose.
It's so obvious. I mean, they were willing to, do that stupid, what is it called? Achievement in popular cinema, which was the most embarrassing category and the most, pandering category ever to get viewers. But they don't do the category that everybody's been asking for. I mean, it's like, it's so obvious that they don't want to do it for a specific reason. And I mean, we're all still speculating, alleged for entertainment purposes only. But it's just, it's too obvious. It's like no longer the elephant in the room. It's like, it's the triceratops in the room now. Why are you staying away from this category as much as you are? I mean, enough to where basically you're going and giving a secondary award that already exists. That's basically a Screen Actors Guild award, what they're doing. So I don't know.
Well, and another funny thing. So the other one I always think of when it's like add a category is animal actors. And it's so funny. Every time we record, it's probably because it's usually on a day off, but I always end up seeing a movie. So I saw a movie today that had an animal actor, and I stayed for the end credits, and sure enough, there's the Humane Society thing.
Oh my God, you saw Deadpool and Wolverine, didn't you?
How did you know?
Because it's the only movie out right now that everybody's gushing about a dog. Well, it's not the only one, but it's the only newer one that I know you haven't seen that everybody's gushing about an animal in it.
So, but one thing that's funny in comparison to this potential category, because a lot of people I think would care if a dog or a cat could win an Oscar. Again, it would probably go to the people training the animal.
Yeah, like the handler or the company.
Exactly. Although obviously they'd bring the animal out on stage for the views during the Oscars. But the reason I think of that now that's funny is that Humane Society thing. Do you remember a few years ago during A Dog's Purpose when there was that whole, oh my God, they're abusing this German Shepherd?
Yes, I remember that being a thing, yeah.
People care so much about the health and safety of these animals, rightfully so, I might add. But there's something really ironic about like the lack of interest or knowledge of the human suffering in the category we're talking about today. Like all these people who are, and again, like stunt work is so ubiquitous in popular films, more so than animal actors, I would say.
Yeah.
And there seems to be quite a bit of human suffering. There's no seal of approval at the end of the movie. Oh, no stunt performers got CTE and killed themselves. So it's just kind of funny. I more than anything, after hearing about this, I am campaigning for stunt work to be an official Oscar category.
I mean, I'm
right down with the casting, right? So that's where I'm standing with this, and just even I don't know, maybe look into it more. Anyone who's listening to this show, like I don't know, find out who your favorite stunt performer is. Look at your favorite movie, see who's in that second unit cast, see who's the double of, because once an interest is generated for these people. There might be some leverage and some power that they can wield to make things better for other stunt performers. Because this is absurd. Like, I don't think it should be hard to get insurance at the very least. Like, it's an anecdote, and he didn't name the person or verify who it was. But that story about his friend breaking all of the bones in half of his body, that's crazy. If that's true, yeah, right. Like the fact that he's afraid to report that, like. And another thing I was thinking about while I was doing this is, Rust. This is a very high-profile thing. And again, it's because the cinematographer was shot. It kind of makes you think, right? Like, what if it was Alec Baldwin's double who got shot? Do you think this would have, right? Do you think this would have gotten swept under the rug? It's wrong no matter what, but like that's another thing I was thinking about while I was writing all these factoids down, is it's like, oh, that's right, the trial for Rust is going on right now. What if it was not the cinematographer who got shot?
That depends. Would the dead double have reported it? That's the real question.
Well, they couldn't because they're dead.
I know. I was being facetious, but yeah.
Right? No, but like, well, and that too, it kind of makes you wonder, like, how many times have stunt doubles been shot on films because of negligence, prop handlers or whatever, and they haven't died, but they haven't reported it either. It just makes you think.
It makes you think.
So
vote for stunt for the next category to be added, and down with this stupid acting category. Like, we have enough of those. Move on. I'm so here with you. That being said, what are you drinking?
Oh man, on to the feature presentation. We are drinking. I decided to do a cocktail. I'm being a little fancy, especially because I was so lazy last episode. So I did, because this retro revival, which I'll get into that. We're going to have a little bit of a friendly debate on this, but this retro revival is sort of emulating film noir. So I went and Googled a list of like film noir inspired cocktails.
Okay.
I found one. Right, and I found one that was nice and simple. I didn't have to go and buy $50 worth of ingredients. It's called the Horse's Neck, and I forgot what movie they paired it with. But so
probably
it's
The Godfather,
whiskey, right? Well, that's more crime than whatever. So it's bourbon whiskey. I got Maker's Mark, ginger ale, Canada Dry for me, and then a twist of lemon. So nice and simple. That's what I'm having. What about you, T?
Okay, so I went super complicated. Did not spend $50 on ingredients, but I kind of substituted what I had for it. But it was called Carlotta's Collapse.
Oh, nice.
So it has mezcal, elderflower liqueur. Some of the stuff I left out because I didn't know what it was. Like, I don't know what Punt Emez is, but lemon juice, orange bitters, and cynar, and then a little bit of salt. So not loving it so far, but I do enjoy elderflower liqueur, so it is finishable for me. But I was like, we needed to do something with the ongoing Carlotta theme in this movie. That being said,
yes.
This movie is 1982's Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. Now, Whiskey, had you heard of this film before I recommended it?
So first off, I'm going to say this Horse's Neck, it's probably because most of the ice had melted, but man, this is refreshing. It's like a lemonade. So recommend this cocktail. Nice and simple.
I'm for that.
So here's what's funny, T. I had seen this movie when I was in like middle school. This was like something, it was like a family movie. I feel like it was around the time when I was starting, like I was vocal about I was taking an interest in movies. And so this was like my dad's idea of like, introducing me to some like classic films through like a comedy, because that's so it took me about once I realized what was going on in the movie, I realized, wait a second, I saw this like a long time ago, like nearly 15, possibly even 20 years ago. Man, I feel old, but but yeah, so yes, I had seen this, but I forgot all about it and it, as I said, took a while for me to be like, wait a second, I remember this whole shtick of like it just being scenes from other movies being spliced in. And that's kind of a big point. As I said, we'll save the debate until later, but I'm going to say I don't think this technically counts as a retro revival, and I have two main reasons for that, but we'll get into that later.
We will get into that later. So this is directed by Carl Reiner, and Carl Reiner, you may know from some of his work. Like, I believe they said that that he created the Dick Van Dyke Show. He worked with Mel Brooks previously for the famous 2,000-Year-Old Man routine. He was in a bunch of other movies like It's a Mad World, the original one. So yes. he's been around for a while. And then it was also written by Carl Reiner, George Geit, and Steve Martin. Cinematography was by Michael Chapman. That should ring a bell. Michael Chapman he's worked on a lot of celebrated works. For example, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, He did. Oh, here's a big one. He did the Michael Jackson Bad music video.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and he did. What was the other one I was gonna say? Ghostbusters 2. He did Scrooged. We watched Scrooged. Previously Space Jam, and just some other 6 Days, 7 Nights. That's another one. So he's been in the business for quite a while, but I thought it was important to highlight him in here. With a lot of like the works and stuff going on. It was edited by Bud Mullen. The music was by Miklos Rosa, and Steve Goodman. The budget for this movie was $9 million with a box office of 18.2 million. So it doubled its budget. So that's good. And then the costumes were done by the fabulous Edith Head. Now, it is important to point out that Edith Head and Miklos, this was both their last film that they'd worked on for both of them.
Yep.
But yeah, so this is so you kind of highlighted on this earlier. This is an interesting film where a lot of, well, first I'll really go through the cast because I was actually going to bring this up. So the cast for this movie, well, in the principal roles, we have Steve Martin as Rigby Reardon, Rachel Ward as Juliet Forrest, George Gaines as Dr. John Hay Forrest, Rini Santoni as Carlos Rodriguez, and Carl Rayner, who also directed this, as the Field Marshal Wilfred von Kluck, or the Butler. He's always the butler for me in this movie. Again, classic. The Butler did it. But yeah, so like I said, this is an interesting movie because basically this is a sort of like detective story with a lot of interaction, I guess you could say, with older scenes, older movies, specifically like where you said was where they put the main characters in two scenes from other movies. And
Yes.
that's kind of its big thing. It's kind of what it's known for. I did read online, this actually started off, Steve Martin, I forgot who said he met with, but he said that this started off as they were talking about something like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if you put like me in a scene with this? And they decided, what if we did a whole movie like that? And I think that's really kind of interesting because, like you talked about last week, where younger people will watch this film and think it's from the 30s. This one, because a lot of the stuff you can't, because of the great work the cinematographer and the editor and everybody did, you can't always tell that it's two separate. Like, we know that because we recognize these people, and most of them are dead by the time this film was made.
Well, they also picked a bunch of. Here's an interesting
also,
thing.
like you said, famous ones.
That's what I was gonna say. Here's the interesting thing is, back when I first saw this, I mentioned I was a lot younger. I had not seen most of these movies. What was really interesting revisiting it this time is I had seen a bunch of these movies. So this time it's like, when Swede is getting shot, I'm like, oh, that's the Killers. And,
Yeah.
when Humphrey Bogart, it's like, oh, that's The Big Sleep. And, and it was cool that they named it on all the credits and stuff, but it was interesting. It kind of, you're right about like, maybe you could put this in front of someone and they wouldn't know the movie necessarily. Like, I knew what the shtick was when I was a little kid as well. I knew that it was like splicing together real movies.
Right.
I shouldn't, it's a real movie too, but like, but
I can't believe you said
here's one of the issues with this being like, it's clearly a comedy. I don't think you could fool anyone into thinking that this is really a film noir, and that's kind of so. As it happens, our last review, it just was a screwball comedy. But my first reason I don't consider this a retro revival is the genre is basically a punchline. Like, it is making fun of the genre that it is emulating, which is not a thing I would say I would consider a retro revival. Like, we the last film we talked about, Paper Moon, was a funny movie, but it was not like funny because, oh wow, screwball comedies were old, right, guys? The same way, like other retro revivals I threw out there, like The Artist does not like draw it doesn't make fun of the fact that it's a silent movie. It treats it very like straightforward. Like, this is a silent movie. It's being released in 2011, but it's as if it came out, back in the time it came out. The Love Witch. It's not making fun of the fact that it is, like a 60s era kind of like horror adjacent movie. Whereas this is kind of the whole point of the comedy in this movie, is that it's taking film noir like tropes and making fun of them. Can we talk about the first joke in this movie? Because, oh my god. Well, Jesus.
That did not age well.
No, it did not.
That was the 80s, and that's what everybody thought was hilarious back then.
I was, so it's been a while. But fact.
To be fair, she gets him back sort of at the end.
Yes, she was adjusting his willy because it was all out of whack.
Yes.
Yeah, no, my god, my jaw dropped when that happened, because I was just like, oh my god, this is not even like, it's, I'm not really against, or I'm not really for like canceling old movies for being problematic, but I was kind of thinking a few months ago, The Jerk happened to be on Netflix, and I hadn't seen it in a really long time, and I always thought it was a really weird movie, so I was like, oh, maybe it'll be funnier this time. If you have not seen, there is just prolific use of the N-word by Steve Martin, and having rewatched that recently paired with this, I'm just like, man, how has this guy not gotten canceled by now? Like, not to say that like he should. It's, I don't think that he probably feels the same way about these movies today, and he doesn't really do that kind of comedy now. But it's just interesting how because he's currently on like a Netflix show.
It's Hulu. Only Murders in the Building.
Only Murders in the Building. Hulu. It's just interesting to me that no one has like tried to cancel him over some of this, because like the Jerk, that's a whole other thing. But this, as I said, my jaw dropped. It was it was shocking, like how dark it was for like, because it's not meant to be like I don't know, man. It just does, it hits different these days. But yeah, like that's right. But so using that as an example, like it's kind of taking the whole hard-boiled detective falls in love with his client thing and turning it into a joke, because that was something that happened a lot in these movies. And it's even, another scene I recognized that I did not recognize when I was a kid, Double Indemnity, and he's not a detective, and she's married, but there you go. Like that's another example of like, ooh, them falling in love or whatever. But they're treating it as like a joke. Like, and going to quite an extreme with the joke where he is like basically assaulting her while she's unconscious. But in my opinion, that's not what a retro revival would do. Like, it might do the whole romance with a client thing, but it wouldn't treat it as a joke. It would be trying to play it straight. Like, the whole idea, and this is kind of a rare sort of genre, and that too, like, so I have a theory, or this is a different type of movie. I'll get into it. But speaking of like what you were talking about with Steve Martin saying he had this idea, I'm actually going to handy dandy Google this, because I don't think he was the first one to have this idea. I just need to look this up.
I didn't say he had the first idea, but this started as they were talking about him doing something, and so they were like, oh, what if you just did this? And then they decided to go from there. Like, this started basically trying to say as a completely separate idea, not like this is an original idea from him to put somebody in a foreign film. I'm not trying to say that.
Okay. No. And maybe, and that too, like maybe he thought he was, I'm not saying you are saying that, but if he thought he was not. And I've got confirmation. Yes. Okay. So we can, let's do this. I was going to wait until like the end, but so have you ever heard of Kung Pao or What's Up Tiger Lily?
I've had Kung Pao chicken at Panda Express.
Okay. So this is a different genre, and maybe we can come up with a new, because we're coining the term retro revival, but this is such a rare subgenre of comedy tea that I could not find. These are two examples I came up with for what kind of movie this is, but I could not find more when I was trying to Google like comedies that reuse old movie footage. I just got the same lists of like, oh, did you know these movies recycled footage from these movies? And I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care if Transformers 2 is using footage from Transformers 1. Stop. So these are mine, and, you know, I'll call to action, at least on our Twitter threads and on our YouTube comments. If anyone listening can think of a movie like this, please put it down there, like, seriously, more so than, like, you know, telling us your opinion or whatever, because I genuinely think there's probably more movies like this. But so, What's Up, Tiger Lily? This predates this movie, and this is literally what this movie is. So it came out in 1966, and it's a Woody Allen movie where it's basically, and maybe it's not exactly the same. Kung Pao is closer to what this is, but I'll do that next because it came out sooner, and I'm sure a lot of people our age actually do know the movie I'm talking about. So What's Up, Tiger Lily is Woody Allen took a Japanese spy movie and dubbed over the audio. Like, he just re-ADR'd everything to make it funny.
Right.
So, similar kind of idea. It wasn't like, I think there were a few scenes where he might have like edited himself in as like, you know, a character or something. But Kung Pao is the one that comes to mind because if you don't know, it's like a kung fu movie that's taking footage from, I believe it's Tiger vs. Crane and Enter the Dragon. I think those are the two. I know it was two very big like 60s era kung fu movies. And the director is starring as like the main character, and he has digitally inserted himself in footage from these movies and creating a new story.
Right.
And it's a really stupid movie, but it's people my age know. Like, I remember people were quoting this all the time. It was a straight to video release, but everyone rented it. Part of it was like the cover, part of it like everyone saw clips of him fighting the cow and stuff like that. So it's just one of those movies that was like really popular, but it's basically what this movie is, but it's like a kung fu movie.
Well, they call it, according to the Wikipedia page, this type of filmmaking is referred to as a collage film.
Okay, and
they did also mention your Tiger Lily film. They also mentioned that during the notable examples of comedies, there was those two, and then they did another one called Apocalypse Pooh, which was a cutting of the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and Apocalypse Now together. I don't know why you'd put those two together, but somebody did, and it's a notable example too.
So there we go. So we didn't coin the term, but now we've got a term to coin. So and there we go. So my other reason I would not consider this a retro revival is the use of recycled footage. Like, again, Paper Moon is a movie. Like, they shot all of the scenes. This could have been, I would have maybe considered this, it could have still been a comedy if it wasn't recycling like the footage. If it shot everything originally, and because it does do a really good job of emulating film noir. You shout out the cinematographer. I think that was a really good idea because I think the cinematographer did a really good job matching the footage with the footage that was being edited in.
Right.
So he did do a really good job. I think that is like the biggest problem though, is that it's not wholly original footage.
Right.
Because, and there we go, like collage film, I love that. So that's what I was going to argue. But I do think this is an interesting genre in and of itself. And as I said, now we know what it's called, collage film. Anyone who might have seen another one, put it in our comments, tweet at us or something, because I bet there's more out there. And it really frustrated me that I could not think of more than two. I was like, there's got to be more than this.
Well, before we go further, because you did mention that, this it does use recycled footage. So I do have what I believe is a complete list of films used. So Wikipedia was nice enough to divide it up also by studio for me. So borrowing from the Universal
end credits
catalog,
was also helpful.
That's true, but this is back when I had to write notes down, so I didn't have the film in front of me. Universal contributed This Gun for Hire from 1942, The Glass Key from 1942, Double Indemnity from 1944, The Lost Weekend from 1945, and The Killers from 1946. Warner Brothers contributed Deception from 1946, Humoresque 1946, The Big Sleep 1946, Dark Passage 1947, and White Heat 1949, which Madonna also wrote an entire song about that movie, also called White Heat, I believe. Metro Goldwyn Mayer contributed the Johnny Edgar 1941, Keeper of the Flame 1943. It's uncredited in the movie, but from my understanding, this is the opening sequence of the movie where the car crashes. The Postman Always Rings Twice 1946, and The Bribe 1949, which you pointed out to me, features the director of, oh my god,
Night of the Hunter.
Thank you, Night of the Hunter, which they also should have bought
Charles
from.
Lofton.
RKO contributed Suspicion from 1941 and Notorious 1946. There's some asterisks here. I do know that Notorious was part of the David O. Selznick catalog at one point. Paramount contributed I Walk Alone from 1947, Sorry, Wrong Number from 1948, and Columbia Pictures contributed In a Lonely Place from 1950. So, with that being said, I will agree with you maybe on essentially the film alone, but I do still think not technically, but technicality wise, this is a retro revival. And
I think this could have been a retro revival.
Well,
I just don't think it.
The reason why I say this is super lucky because this is an older movie and it's not one that like people just talk about all the time. There wasn't a lot of articles on it. However, the American Cinematographer magazine was very kind earlier this year to have reprinted an article that they wrote about it from November of 1982. So this is by Dean Goodhill, and so they sit down and they talk with, I believe it's Michael Chapman, is who I said was the cinematographer for this movie. Well, first off, I don't like Michael Chapman just based on this interview alone, but it was the 80s, and I guess certain things are okay to say. But it's really interesting when you talk about how he basically had to relearn the techniques and things that had to be used to recreate this, because he said the problem with this is that every film had its own look. There was no like blanket look he could just copy and reproduce. He had to go back and kind of look at these, and this is what he talks about. This is a quote, and I think you would like this because, as you say, you're a cinematography nerd, and so he gets very into the cinematography stuff here.
Well, and I know what he's talking about too, especially like knowing the movies that are, or some of the movies that are used. It's like Double Indemnity does not look like The Killers,
right?
They're very different. Like even just the vibe in them, it's hard to like. Oh my god, without getting like crazy technical and also not knowing how they did some of the shots and stuff, it's like the lighting's different. I know what he means. It must have frankly been kind of infuriating because it's like, you know, although one thing I do like though is that every scene just borrowed stuff from a specific movie. So he had to pretty much, I'm guessing, start from scratch with every scene, but that's better than like, you know, having to go back and forth between styles. Like if they were editing like multiple scenes from different movies into one scene from this, like that would have made me probably lose my mind if I were in his position. But
well, this is super interesting. So he talks about how his approach to this, as far as kind of, I guess, matching the color and everything else that he could in the movies. So here's a quote. One of the things I did when we got as good a print as we possibly could get of each of the old things printed up as well as Technicolor could do it, I took frames and had them mounted on slides. Then I had them build me a dark black room on the corner of the stage with a projector and a good screen. And I had the screen measured so that I knew it was 16-foot Lamberts or as close as I could get. And I would study them. I would look at it and I would think, the light comes from where? There's this much backlight. It seems as though there's this kind of contrast ratio. The shadows seem very dark. The shadows don't seem very dark. And I would try to paint by numbers and match them. That was all I could think of to do, you know. He concluded, if you're intercutting back and forth, you much match pre-existing stuff, your style, the amount of light, and the stop that you use almost become forced upon you. So not only did he have to, like, you know, learn essentially how to make things in the tech, in the 1940s or the techniques that they used, he also basically had to adopt styles that weren't even his, which I thought was super interesting. I never thought about that, because you always think about the director and the director's vision, the director's voice, etc., etc. You never really stop to think about, oh yeah, that's right. I mean, you probably have, I haven't. The cinematographer's taste and their own style.
Oh
So
yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing. Cinematographers are known for different. Most famously, maybe not most famous, but famously, the cinematographer of The Godfather is known as the Prince of Darkness, because of what he's able to accomplish with very little light. Like the scene everyone points to is the backroom wedding scene that everyone thinks of when they think of that movie.
Oh,
But that's like his thing.
You
Like,
mean the
he's
one
Prince
where I
of
had
Dark-
to adjust the brightness on my screen to even see what was going on?
My point is that that's like something he was known for.
Right. That was his
thing,
specialty.
Yeah, and I hate that I'm forgetting his name, but the cinematographer who won the Oscar for like Blade Runner 2049, like he is no. I mean, every time I think of him, I just think of these super elaborate, almost like painting like just detailed. They're all known for their own thing. And that's kind of why directors pick them too, like, oh,
Right.
I really liked how this movie looked. Can you do that for my movie? And I mean, frankly, that it's in the name, director of photography. So in the same way, they have their own vibe, which is funny because then that tends to get kind of roped in. Again, we're anti that on this show, but everyone, the auteur theory crap needs to die because, like, yes, directors have some creative say in how things look, but if you like the way the movie looks, that is the cinematographer or director of photography. That's not the director. He might, be signing off on how it looks, and if he's a famous director, he clearly is working with a specific cinematographer that he likes. But
Right.
that's like another thing that just people like, oh wow, this shot's really cool. The director's nah, it's not the director's idea.
So this was interesting. This guy's kind of a little too candid in his interviews. So he talks about how, and I actually never thought about this, but you're correct. But if you watch like a classic noir film, they always have, everything like in a long shot or a wide shot or whatever, or basically the shot of the room. It's, it's lit like it's supposed to be in the style and everything. And everybody's lit the way they're supposed to. But they always said if you look at a female's face in those movies, they're always perfectly well lit. And he's like, this is what he had to say about it. And I'm like, this dude's kind of rude, but okay. He says, they're traditions now, Chapman agreed, but at the time they were just trying to hustle out a commercial product to make money, trying to make some dumb chick look as good as she could. And even so, I can't believe he said that. But basically he's describing basically how they're interested in selling, the movie star sort of. So, she always looked her best, whether it's Katharine Hepburn, anybody. They looked as best as they could possibly make them. And I actually never thought about that. And he said that's basically something they had to do in this movie. And that was interesting. So did not like that he called them dumb chicks. And
no, well lit. This is cinematography 101, my guy. And another thing I learned in film school, which you see this with like Instagram girls. Think of how people take selfies. They always hold their phone up, right? Something I learned in film school: do not film a woman from below like eye level, because they will suddenly have 6 chins and look disgusting.
Yeah.
Even if they're gorgeous. Like, it's just one of those funny things.
It's perspective.
Then,
it's not them. It's the perspective.
It's just funny because I learned that before social media was, like, really a thing. And now, like, once I was an adult, I always saw, like, teenage girls. They know. They're basically photographers because they know. Hold the phone up because that makes you look prettier. Especially, like, some really overdo it and hold it. But... if you hold it above your eye line, suddenly you look a little bit prettier. It's really weird.
Well, and then one of the things he also talked about, again, I hate that he said this, but he talked about the use of color filters to achieve certain looks. And you would think, black and white film might use color filters. Well, like they would use certain ones to filter light. So, for example, like the clouds would stand out against the sky more so than they normally do, things like that. And so they said that he
Yep.
used various shades of green and yellow filters that, like I said, darken the sky and anything else that is blue, thus making the clouds stand out in relief. Now then he goes on to say this. Again, I think this guy did an amazing job, but his execution on what he said was a little too Frankenstein.
I mean, I pointed it out with that opening joke, but yeah, in 1982, brother, different time, I guess.
He said the old timers, because they asked him about the color, about colored filters and how they're used by black and white photographer. Chapman admitted the old timers used to really know a lot about those exterior filters in black and white. There was an enormous mythology of hundreds and hundreds of filters. This one did this, and this guy only used this, and that guy always had to have that. I think a lot of it was in their heads, psychological, but there was a huge elaborate body of kind of false knowledge about filters, which is, thank God, totally lost. I don't have any interest in it anyway. So, ignoring the fact that he just basically said an entire body of knowledge about how to use filters is lost, and he's fine with that because he's not interested in it, that's super interesting to me because the level of detail that it takes to produce black and white works is a lot more complicated than I realized.
Oh, yeah. No, I'd say that the two nerdiest aspects of filmmaking are cinematography and editing. That is where you can just go down the rabbit hole as far as like all sorts of weird techniques and like crazy things. Like it's nuts. And that's what, like, I would say I'm a cinematography enthusiast, and I like, trying to make interesting photographs and stuff. And it's always fun to be behind the camera. I don't think I will ever be on the same level as some of these dudes and dudettes, because it is crazy nerdy, the kind of things that you can do, and just manipulate the image with like weird. It goes even beyond that, like, and also it depends on like what format you're using and what kind of lenses you're using, and nowadays, are you doing DSLR? Are you shooting film? What kind of film? What company of film? Like, it is absurd, just the things that will make a difference. Like, is it Kodak? Is it Kodak stock, or are you using, like, it's nuts,
right? And everybody has their preferences. They have their reasons for doing so. And so I just like, I think the super like to talk about, the people talk about like lost and dead languages. The last people who spoke it have passed on, so we don't know. How to read this language, what this language was. It's the same idea with this. And I thought it was just really sad that this has been lost. And I find it sad that this guy who is a cinematographer is so flippant about it, because even the writer goes on to say that it's a shame that the old timers' knowledge about filters has been lost. Like, they say that they tried to talk to veteran cinematographer Milton Krasner, who, did stuff like All About Eve, says that this was back in 82, says he can't remember much about the filters he used in his black and white days. Because he said when color came along, he gave away all his filters away, and he doesn't remember who he gave them to, and he forgot all of it except basically the basics. So like you said, yeah, even the people that were still around at this time, because it's been so long, and they've had to learn all this other knowledge with color and all this other fun stuff, they don't even remember what it was. So that was interesting. They also talked about how they did car shots, which I have never thought about this, but this was interesting. The actor was supposed to be driving, didn't know which way to turn the steering wheel or whether to turn it at all, since he couldn't see the rear projected image of the road he was supposed to be on. So the actor would clutch the wheel, which is connected to a crank at the bottom of the shaft, and there, out of frame, a prop person would sit facing the process screen and turn the wheel in whatever direction was appropriate to the rear projection road. So I actually never thought about, because personally, I always think everybody kind of just wildly turns the wheel, just whatever in these car shots. But
to be honest, this is a comedy, so in a way, that's sort of a missed gag that they could have done, was just have Steve Martin do whatever he wants and then just have it not match at all.
I mean, so I guess we talked about a retro revival. So we talked kind of about the technicalities, and this guy was very knowledgeable, as repulsive as he was, but he worked with Scorsese, so that tracks. What's interesting, so you talked about how because of the reuse and because it's kind of more spoofing and poking fun, at
Well,
the
it's also
genre.
not taking the genre seriously. Like,
Right.
with what I just said, it's like, you're right. If it was a retro revival, it would be inappropriate for him to be goofing off with the steering wheel. But this isn't taking the genre very seriously. Again, like it's hard. With Paper Moon, it was a comedy, but it was not making. It wasn't drawing attention to the fact that it was anachronistic to the 70s. You know what I mean? It was
Right.
funny in the story, not in like, oh, hey, look at this. Isn't it weird that this movie looks really old? Wink, wink. Like there was none of that. Whereas a lot of the jokes in this movie come from the fact that that this is a spoof of a type of movie. There's a lot of the opening joke is inappropriate as it is. It's making fun of a trope. You have a lot of scenes where
With the you
don't need
you have the
to know
super
the context.
handsy detective, who can't keep his
Yeah.
hands off the leading lady.
Well, so it's also interesting if you do know any of the movies that are being featured in this, because the context has changed completely with all of the scenes. And I feel like that's kind of also a joke in and of themselves if you've seen the movies. Like Double Indemnity was one, the supermarket scene that's really memorable in the original movie. And then in this one, it's like, oh, it's funny because he's wearing a dress. And it's not the woman from Double Indemnity. It's Steve Martin in a dress.
Well,
and then
see,
one
but I
bit
don't
that
feel
was
like
really...
I don't feel like that's making fun of the genre, though.
No, but it's not taking itself seriously.
But so I guess the question that I have is, can a film pay homage and have a deep, an admiration for a genre, but still have fun with it?
And that's where the second point was higher for me as far as saying this isn't a retro revival. Because until it clicked with me that I was like, oh wait, I remember this movie. It's using all of this old, because it took a little while for me to notice, oh wait a second, this is from this movie. Once that happened, I'm like, okay, this can't count because it's not wholly original. Again, like none of the other examples of retro revivals are using like footage from famous movies. They're making their own, like they might look like scenes from famous movies, but they're not. Like I feel like the best example of this, like I brought up a bunch of examples, but The Artist won Best Picture in 2011. And again, like if you didn't know that movie came out in 2011, you could definitely, like, it never makes fun of the fact that it's a silent movie. It's never it is a comedy again, but it is a like Chaplin-esque comedy where it's a lot of like physical humor and sight gags and like very talented sort of like physical comedy. And if I remember correctly, I think it was like an Italian director, so it's like not even like an English movie, but it didn't really need to be because it was silent anyway, and you could just change the reading panels to whatever language and it would still be the same thing. But like that movie was telling, and not only so it was a comedy, but it's kind of about this person who is being aged out. For anyone who hasn't seen The Artist, it's a silent movie about the end of silent movies. So it's about a silent film actor who is becoming obsolete and is not good enough to go on to the talkies, which is a genre, that's a story. I think the most famous example I can think of is like Singing in the Rain is basically about the same thing.
That's what I was about to say. I was about to say, I'm like, isn't that just Singing in the Rain?
It is, but
sadder.
Have you seen The Artist, T? I feel like I've heard you like kind of talk down about it in the past, but also maybe it wasn't you. But have you seen The Artist?
I have not seen it in its completion. I've seen parts of it.
You should probably sit down and watch it. But I feel like that is the prime example of a, what we're calling a retro revival, because it takes itself seriously. It's still got funny moments because it's, one of those throwback comedies to like Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd and all that sort of stuff. But it's funny in the same way that those old movies were funny. And
I would argue, though, that the plot of the film, though, itself is basically poking fun at an obsolete medium.
Well, it's using the medium to kind of, it's sort of ironic, I guess. Like, again, it's not, this movie that we're talking about is very, very obviously making fun of kind of the absurd, and that too, like, the mystery is not being taken seriously. You know, the end of this film, when it's like, oh, it was Nazis the whole time, like, the Carlotta thing was kind of clever, but this is sort of just a collection of disjointed scenes to me, because none of the mystery really led to the next thread of the story. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just sort of Steve Martin having funny interactions with scenes cut from other movies.
Okay,
until, oh, Carlotta's a place, and then I went to Carlotta and it was Nazis. Do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't, I enjoyed watching this, especially, you know, with it being years later and me knowing a lot more about these movies. And I do think some of the jokes were very funny. One of my personal favorites was when he called her sister.
Right.
It's just her, like, hysterically screaming at him on the phone. Like, that was funny. But, like, when I say it's not taking the film seriously, it's not taking anything in the film seriously. The story does not matter. The plot points don't matter. It's just sort of each scene leads into the next. And that too, like, it almost kind of, if there was none of his voiceover in there, would you even really know how he's getting to the next point?
I mean, but to be fair, they use voiceover in noir films for the same reason.
Sort of, but in noir films, there's usually clues that lead to an investigation, which leads into meeting new... Do you know what I mean?
I guess you're right. I guess, like, the narration...
especially the middle chunk of this movie, like, if you're taking the story seriously, it's just a bunch of dead ends. And then it's him just... oh, well, maybe this character will give me some information. So, like, even if you wanted to take it seriously as, like, a mystery, you can't, because the film doesn't really come up with a convincing or interesting story to follow. Do you know what I mean? Like, it focuses more on the comedy, because, like, I do think, even though I was kind of being harsh on the rape joke at the beginning, rightfully so in my opinion, like, I do think this is a funny movie, and watching it later, again, like, I even think it's funnier if you know what movies are being used, because the context is completely changed and it makes it kind of funny.
Right.
But that's, again, like, I do think if this were a spoof movie, I'd be more forgiving about calling it a retro revival. If it was wholly originally shot and it was not using old footage, but it was still a silly film noir, I could forgive it for that. But just the fact that it's using, like, again, going back to The Artist, you know, it's not just The Artist and Singing in the Rain are about, like, the transition into sound film. As I said, there's, like, a whole bunch of movies about that period in Hollywood history that all... Right. In fact, we just talked about one. Sunset Boulevard was also, you know, that actress did not transition into talkies, and so she went insane in her mansion. You know, it doesn't take place during the transition, but that's, like, a whole plot point of, like, why she did not continue being a famous... So it's not, like, an original thing. But again, with The Artist, it's not using footage from Buster Keaton films or anything. They're shooting their own original comedy pieces. When they're dancing, like, that's them dancing. They're not, like, using a scene from, you know, so, like, that... this is not meant to be like, oh, this movie is bad because of this. It's just, I feel like that kind of disqualifies it as far as being this particular subgenre. And frankly, the fact that the Wikipedia counts this as a collage film, I guess I'm not the only one to think so.
Well, they do still refer to it as an homage. But I guess
I would say it is a homage. I completely agree with that. I do think this is paying tribute. I do think it's a homage. But at least as far as this specific genre that we're talking about, it seems like collage.
I guess what you're trying to say, and I think I finally understand, is what you're trying to say is this film, it wasn't like it went back and picked up, you know, maybe an obsolete film style and tried to create a film just in that style. It was super super self-referential. It knew, I mean, they know what they're doing, but
here's another example.
The audience will know what it's doing.
Here's another example, and I think I might have mentioned this in our last episode, but let me shit on another movie to make the same point. So, and we'll shit on a movie that you don't like. So, La La Land.
Oh, good. Okay.
La La Land is not a retro revival, in my opinion. And it's not a retro revival because it is trying to, like, I might have wanted it to be. Like, it's obviously trying to emulate those big,
The
musical
MGM musicals.
Exactly. It does not look like it, though. It looks like a modern film, and it takes place in modern times. If La La Land were the same story, same music, but set in, like, the same, like, the 50s or something, like, during that whole big MGM thing.
I get you.
And the cinematographer made it look the same, and the actors and actresses put on those same kind of performances. And maybe it's set in a different time, but it's still about, like, a jazz music. Hell, I mean, that would actually make a lot of sense setting it way back then if it's a jazz musician and an actress. So, like, same story, but in a different time period, looking like the time period that it's from. Then it would have been a retro revival. And you could have still used all the same songs. Like, it still could have been, a mediocre one. But in my opinion, that is why it is not a retro revival, is it takes place in modern times and it looks like a modern movie.
So I have a question. I have a question for you. So about retro revival. Then, so let's say they okay. So I guess let's use La La Land as an example, just because I've seen it and I can reference it. I don't like it, but I can reference it. So based on what you're saying, so let's say they set it in modern times, right? But, and when I say modern times, I mean, like, technology and current events stuff is relevant, but they completely did the style, like the visual style, the what is that stuff called? The linguistic style and the fashion style of one of those classic MGM movies. So basically, it's essentially that movie, but, like, now they have cell phones to communicate. Would you still consider that a retro revival? Because it's basically essentially trying to take that exact style of a film and bring it kind of into the foreground to now kind of show maybe that it's not obsolete as a style. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Would that be considered a revival?
I'd still say no. I would say it still could be a good movie, but I do think that it needs to... I don't know if they specify in The Love Witch what era it's set in, but it looks like the 60s. You know what I mean? And I don't think they have cell phones. Same thing. Paper Moon, we just talked about, takes place during the Great Depression, the same era in which screwball comedies were really popular.
Right.
So, like, here's an example. Like, let's make a retro revival, and let's use a very easy to understand genre. Let's do 1950s sci-fi monster movies. So we're talking about them. We're talking about the Mole People. We're talking about Attack of the Giant Spider.
The Blob.
So what's our monster, T? What is an animal or an insect that we can make look giant?
A radioactive fire ant.
Okay. Attack of the fire ants from Mars or something.
Right,
so,
right.
To do this, we need to shoot it in black and white. It needs to be very, like, cheesy cornball acting. We can hire whoever the hell we feel like would be good at doing it, but they need to have a laughably, like,
over the top performance.
Over the top, or just, and that too, like, half of the movie needs to be like people in a science lab over explaining what the ants do.
Yeah.
And then for the action shots, we just need to, like, mat in, B-roll of the ants walking around. And it needs to be set in the 1950s. So whether it's a good movie...
And there's quite obviously, like, a giant pipe that comes down on a street that they're pretending is the ant leg.
Exactly. It just needs to look... And maybe you do want to, like, make the effects... like a little, like, you can try to make it a good movie. Like, it doesn't, because maybe it's the genre I picked, but that's another one where you could accidentally kind of make a comedy.
Yeah.
But, like, you're just trying to make it feel like it's out of the era that it came from,
But I think that's what I was trying to say. It's like when I use my La La Land example, where I was said, let's say I made this. It's the modern, but it literally looks as though, except for maybe the technology, it looks as though it could have been made back then. That's what I mean, because I've always thought that would be a super interesting film where it's like modern times, but it looks, sounds, and feels very 50s, but it's relatable because it's today. I don't know if that
And
made any
that's
sense.
where you start splitting hairs. Because,
Okay.
like, again, that could be a really cool movie. Like, for instance, a little while ago, I shared with you that music video for Knocked Loose because I really liked how the music video looked. Now, that looks like vintage, like, 70s horror.
Yeah,
but
it does.
clearly also, like, is not from that era. Like, technically, you don't see any cell phones or anything, but just kind of the music and also, like, maybe the guitars the band are...
Right.
I feel like you wouldn't be tricked into thinking that it's from that era. And maybe you could do that with a movie. So, there's like cell phones, but it looks like a 70s film or something like that.
Yeah.
Another great example. Speaking of horror, you were telling me about and the third one just came out, Maxine, but there was X, there was Pearl, and recently there was Maxine. I did finally see X. It was on Netflix a little while ago, and I would kind of classify that as a retro revival. I wouldn't say that the aesthetics were super strong, but it's set in the 70s or like early 80s. It looks like it's from that era, and no one's using cell phones because it's set in the time period that the movie looks like it's from.
Right.
The only thing you might be able to argue is that a movie like that probably, although there was plenty of smutty movies I mean, hell, like in the late 70s, Deep Throat came out.
Oh my god, I was about to say that.
So, but X is a good example. I don't know why I didn't think of this until now, but I would kind of consider X a retro revival because it is sort of going for that Texas Chainsaw, vintage 70s, like really trashy kind of horror movie.
Yeah, I get you.
But I think it counts. So, yeah, and this is, again, this is just us kind of explaining what this genre is. I'm not trying to say that a movie, is bad if it's not a retro revival. And frankly, I did enjoy this movie. I just don't think it counts. And the big reason is the footage from the famous movies. If this had been just a silly film noir spoof where they absolutely perfected making it look like it came from the 40s, I'd be more inclined to say it counts as a retro revival. It's just because it's using a lot of, and that's the thing too, as the film goes, as I said, it just kind of is scene after scene of Steve Martin interacting in a funny way with a scene out of context in which the context is changed to be funny. Right. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't really gel story-wise, and it also doesn't really, if half of the movie is footage from other movies, then it's it's hard to really say it's emulating rather than just reusing. And that's why I like that whoever came up with the term collage film, I like that, because it's the same thing with those movies I was talking about. Kung Pao was a really popular stupid movie from the mid-2000s. Okay. And you could even argue that it is just stealing a ton of footage from these kung fu movies, but the context is completely changed. The hero has a talking tongue with a face. There's a fight scene with a cow. There's a villain with triangles. It is a really stupid movie, but it's transformed the original footage the same way this movie has done. Yeah. But would Kung Pao be a retro revival if it's supposed to look kind of, not really. It looks like a pretty, the footage used is also upscaled, so it looks better than I'm sure anyone who's seen Kung Pao knows what I'm talking about. It doesn't have that grainy 60s kind of look to it. It does feel really corny, and there's some sound and music and stuff that's reused from it, but it's not trying to trick you into thinking that it's from that era. If anything, it kind of made me wonder what movies the footage was being used from, because I was just what what is this from, where there's this villain with triangles sticking out of his torso and stuff. And yeah,
so I guess what you're trying to say is there's definitely though a difference between a revival, a retro revival, and an homage film.
Yeah, and I'm even kind of I guess I just like to be very specific about subgenres, because that's the other thing too, is another episode would be is What's Up Tiger Lily really a collage film if it's just dubbed over audio? Because I haven't seen it in a while. It could be that Woody Allen added himself in some scenes and I'm just forgetting about it, but thinking about it, I'm pretty sure it was just the spy movie, but he just changed all of the dialogue in ADR. So that would also be like a debate. Like, is that even a collage film if you're just showing the whole full film but with different audio? Like, you have transformed it, but like it's almost kind of like what the dub guys, what Djibouti dubs on YouTube.
Oh my god, I love him.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's very much You're basically saying, is it really is it really something, like a revival, like you said, if it's essentially doing the equivalent of, oh my god, what was that show where they used to just sit in the front and just like talk about the movies and be like, oh my god, this is awful, and it's always a sci-fi movie. Oh,
it's kind of like, what if I decided to make a film emulating like a romantic comedy from the 60s, and I just took footage from like Breakfast at Tiffany's and maybe some like stuff from like the Pajama Game. You know what I mean? Like, it's at a certain point, it's like, am I even really making like a retro revival of that, or am I just using
it's like Mystery
Audrey
Science
Hepburn?
Theater?
Exactly. So yeah, that's my reasoning. I don't think this counts, but I think this was a good pick nonetheless, just because I think it was worth kind of really straightening out the definition from the last movie. And this is also like worth talking about as a movie, which I think we should talk about the movie as the like last point of this, because we've mostly just been talking about whether or not it's a retro revival. But yeah, so would you like to explain like what the plot, the very thin plot is, and kind of what the deal is with the movie? Like,
of course. So essentially what this movie is, it's a, detective noir style, but the story is essentially this guy, the scientisty guy, supposedly died in a car wreck, and his daughter is like, I don't think so, and hires this guy to go and look into this. And he finds out that he was also that he has a list of all these people who are considered enemies of Carlotta and friends of Carlotta, and they go and they track down who all these people are, and all these enemies of Carlotta end up dead, keep ending up dead. The friends of Carlotta, the ones he's able to come into contact with, seem to keep disappearing. And so eventually he is able to make the connection that it has to do with this cruise ship. And this cruise ship, everybody who was on it has turned up dead. And now I'm trying to remember what the plot is. Now I'm confused.
See what I mean?
Stop it. The plot makes sense when I watched it.
Well, it's not that it doesn't make sense. It's that it's hard to keep straight when like it's just dead ends again, like it's not. It is still like funny and entertaining, but like the plot is one of the weaker aspects of the movie, because it's just like, oh no, this character I was following died. Okay, I'll try this other character. Okay. Yeah, and then it turns out the whole thing was Nazis, Scooby-Doo style. Oh my god, it was Nazis, and Carl Reiner is one. Well, although that was kind of funny.
That's more Indiana Jones style than Scooby-Doo.
I will say I do like, and it doesn't have that earned kind of aha moment, because it's just a silly sort of reveal. But I did still find it funny. So Carl Reiner is it Carl Reiner?
Carl Reiner.
Okay, Carl
is
Reiner
the mastermind.
Is a butler. Yes, so at the very, very beginning of the movie, he is in one little scene where he is a butler, and you never see him again, and then it turns out he is like a Nazi, and the guy was not murdered. It was like a fake death, because they're using his science for, trying to win World War II again or something.
He's trying to get the U.S. to pay. He's trying to pay back the U.S. for destroying, the Nazi regime by using this mold that the scientists created that is so powerful it will dissolve everything.
That's
it's
right.
a very over-the-top thing.
Yeah, and then they accidentally like disintegrated, and that's the thing too. He's
Terre
a
Haute,
cheese
Indiana.
Scientist. There are things like there's a lot of funny things too. Like we said, he's a scientist. He's a cheese scientist.
Yeah, and
there's like he would do his experiments out here so that the smell wouldn't bother people. Like there is some legitimately silly stuff. I mentioned to you when I noticed Charles Lofton was in the movie. It's he's just referred to as the fat sweaty guy.
Right.
And there's like some very there's just some funny things in the movie. And and I think it succeeds in what it was setting out to do, which is just kind of be silly, take these movies and change up the context so that the scenes are funny and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of its biggest problem, is that the plot is not very engrossing. Like, this is like a movie that
it's kind of more like reactionary, almost like humor a little
exactly.
bit.
I think it is interesting to see.
I haven't seen Double Indemnity in forever, and so when you said the grocery store scene from Double Indemnity, I'm like, that's where I knew that from, because I was like, this is very familiar.
Right.
Uh-oh.
I feel like it's maybe that's why we talked so much about whether or not it's a retro revival, because like once you kind of lay it out, there's not a lot to say about it.
I think its strongest points, though, I think the strongest points though here to make is there's 3 points that I think this movie succeeds in. One is the effort of the cinematographer to replicate the style and everything of the scenes that they use as best as they could. The ability for, and I know you complained about a bunch of these scenes lead nowhere, but at least how they get there in the story makes sense. And it goes as far as to say is his last name comes up in one of these clips at the very, very end of the movie. So the fact that comes up again. So I do commend the writing a little bit and writing all these clips together, because it wasn't like they wrote the story, and from what I read, they didn't write the story and then add the clips later. They wrote the story pulling these clips in mind. So I thought that was good. And then I also just kind of, and this is maybe where you'll disagree. Steve Martin, I know you talked about the auteur theory, which I kind of agree with you on, is, it's not really a thing, but I will say Steve Martin's humor and his movies kind of just have their own feel to them, and this definitely does have that same feel to it. Not saying that he's responsible for the feeling in the film, but it's just something about his acting and his humor and stuff always just feels some type of way.
He's very talented. He's got an interesting sense of humor. Like I mentioned, he's fun whiskey fact. In my opinion, our worst episode of the show was Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and we talked a lot about Steve Martin in that. But I mentioned in that review how his stand-up is very strange by today's standards, and even if you are aware of him as an actor, it feels off. And frankly, that's part of the reason I rewatched The Jerk a few months ago, is that is heavily based on his stand-up routine. Yeah. So I was kind of like, is he funny? Is he when he, or at least in that era? Because I think the man is massively talented. I talked even in that review about how he's a really good banjo player. He's made some bluegrass albums that are genuinely good. Yeah. And he's not doing a joke thing. I think he can be a good serious actor. But he, his sense of humor works really well with this idea that they were going with, because he's got some just weird ideas for where scenes are going. I mentioned the Double Indemnity supermarket scene. He's in a dress. There was the bit in The Killing where what's his face, but the Swede gets shot, and he's like, "Oh, you gotta see my Java."
That was the longest cup of coffee to make ever, either. But it's it's him.
So many funny things about that. Who makes coffee in a pot? I guess they did back then. Also, he cracks 2 eggs and leaves the shells in, and it's just there's that. He's got a good idea in every scene of how to make it goofy. Yeah. I also there's a bit where they left it in intentionally, where, because you mentioned how it was clever how they used his name, or his last name, his character's last name. But there's a bit, I think it's with Humphrey Bogart, where he just calls him something. He's like, "That's not my name." And they just left that in. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As I said, even though I don't think this is a retro revival, I think it did a really good job with emulating the look of all these movies. Right. And I think that was what was kind of neat too. I noticed that Edith Head did the costumes. Shout out, last episode we did with her costumes, I believe, was Airport. But
Yeah,
I think
you're
that
right.
was
That was
not an
last one.
accident, because
No,
I think
they
you
did
listed.
say they tried to hit up, some of the powerhouses of kind of this era of filmmaking, or at least of older filmmaking, maybe not noir, to try to, really sort of get this feel as good as possible. I mean, Michael Chapman talked about how they tried sourcing like older makeup and stuff like that to really kind of get the look as close as they could. He actually mentions, again, I think the dude's being a little cocky. He talked about how um, he had he was trying to match the exposure. I think as we talked about the exposure of the car scenes to the film behind it, and he figured out a way to do it with Polaroid cameras. And he said that actually kind of made some of the older directors upset because they used to have to. They eventually learned to have an eye for it, to kind of look at it and be like, yeah, that looks about right. Um, and then they were kind of like, okay, I guess this kind of works. But I thought that, yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, they did try to do as much as they could to really sort of emulate as best they could this look, from who they sourced to the techniques they used, everything.
Yes, no, and I'm glad they got Edith Head. Especially like costumes are kind of important as far as, and that's the funny thing too, is like I mean, she's more known for like the 50s and 60s, but I'm pretty sure she was working in the time when these movies were big. You know more about her than I do, I think, because you're more into costumes and stuff. But am I crazy? I feel like she was working in like the 40s and 30s.
I am confirming. Well, first off, she was born in 1897. Um,
Jesus.
I
Wow,
for
she was.
some reason I did not. Yeah, I mean she did the design for, as you called it, my spirit animal in Rear Window. Grace Kelly, she did like her dress. I mean, that's not a noir, but that's the 50s sort of time period. Um,
Yeah.
but let me just confirm. This would be more like 40s. So the Paramount, where so she started at Paramount in 1924. Oh yeah, she did stuff in the 40s. She dressed Ginger Rogers in Lady in the Dark. She had a nomination for The Emperor and the Waltz, and she was a favorite among female stars in the 40s and 50s, including many of the ones that we saw in the film. Like, I know specifically I'm remembering Barbara Stanwyck, but yeah, so she was definitely working at this time period. But 1897 is shocking to me, especially she was still around for this. She essentially
Uh,
passed away when this was in production, because it says that she passed away in 1981 and this came out in 1982. So, yeah,
Super wild.
that's wild. But yeah, so
Well,
she
one
was
thing,
83.
how did this do? We kind of didn't do the usual like breakdown and stuff, but like, was this a box office success when it came out? Were
So
people into this?
so it got good reviews, by today's standards. They're kind of average reviews, like 77% Rotten Tomatoes. But from what the reviewers that were pulled out for the wiki article, they did mention, is it kind of a one note movie? Yes, but it's like super enjoyable. So people liked it, and it made double its budget. Like, it was a $9 million film, and it made like 18.2 million or something
So
back.
it
So
was it was pretty good.
it was pretty good, yeah.
Like not
And this
not
is
a
kind of
not a
also during
box office
Steve,
smash, but it did okay.
but then this is also sort of kind of Steve Martin's like heyday. Um,
Well, like I'd have to look. The Jerk, I'm sure, made a lot more money than this, and this was. I think The Jerk was 1978 or
nine,
nine.
nine.
So nine. Yeah, if I looked that up, I'm pretty sure it would have done quite a bit more than
Yes,
18
so
million.
it had a budget of 4 million. The Jerk had a budget of $4 million, and it made 100 million.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. Like this did fine. It was not a bomb, but although like this is the kind of thing
It's also more
nerds like you
niche.
and me are good. Well, this is like a movie for movie people.
Yes,
Another
it
one
is.
that I kind of wrote down as maybe being considered a retro revival, but maybe not. Have you ever seen Movie?
Why does that sound familiar to me?
So it's a spoof movie, but it's like emulating two classic styles of film. So the first, it's like basically a double feature, but it's like each story is like an hour instead of 90 minutes. So the first one is like a boxing movie, and then the second one is a musical. and they're both silly, but like they're very seriously put together. And so that was one, if you had seen, that would have been part of the, debate.
Is this the movie? Is this the movie that has like a trailer for a random movie in the middle of it?
No, that's I mean, maybe it is. It's Grindhouse did that as well. I don't think I remember that in movie, but you'd probably remember if you saw movie because both of the genres are like the sort of thing you would like. But that's another one where it is a spoof movie. Basically, like, it's what this movie would have been if it wasn't recycling footage. Like, if Steve Martin had just shot a straight silly film noir using all original footage, it would have been what movie is.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's where I was going to be like, oh, is this a retro revival? Because that's another one where it's like kind of debatable because it does look exactly like the kind of movie that would come out at that time. But then It's also just so over the top silly, you can't take it seriously. But I think it has come to that time where we share our opinion of the film. What do you think, T? I take it this is one of your favorites.
It's not one of my favorites, but it's one I definitely enjoy. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2.5 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. And the main reason for that being, like you said, it's enjoyable, it's fun, but the lack of, not plot, but the like you said, the middle section being more kind of, okay, we're going to hop now into this movie sort of a situation. And
exactly. It's very like, it's my cocktail is affecting me now too because I can't think of the word, but it's like it drifts all over the place. It's very like
it's a little aimless in the middle.
There you go. That's a good word for it. It's very aimless. And yeah,
but still
it's
funny.
It's funny. I was going to give it exactly the same 2.5 for me. It's good. I would watch it again. It would not be my first choice, but it's a nice little oddity. I'm glad we found a term for what it is, and I like that. I don't know who came up with collage film, but I like that. And as I said, if anyone can think of other collage films, leave it down in the comments if you're listening to this on our YouTube music thing. But yeah, it's pretty solid. Just not anything mind-blowing. It's probably not going to leave you too much in stitches. And Steve Martin, rape is not funny. Come on, let's have an apology. This is
it's
to be fair, this was in
Martin. I feel like this is because again, he was not the only one who wrote this. So I
am just joking. I mean, like you can tell from the cinematographer again, and I don't even know if he's ever like apologized for his old stuff. It's just funny because I never hear anyone being mad at him. Maybe it's because he never talks about politics these days. He just kind of does his shows and then is quiet. He doesn't have social media. Maybe that's why, but it's just funny because his early career, especially the jerk at this, it's like, I'm amazed there hasn't been like some very angry person trying to cancel him on the internet.
Well, to be fair, I feel
some
like
of his stuff.
I feel like the difference between him and somebody that would be canceled nowadays is just all the stuff that's questionable was done while he was playing a role. Like, not even really, if you listen to his stand-up is not super racy either.
Not particularly. So again, it's just interesting because the type of people that get angry on the internet don't care about context. They just kind of want to watch someone's life get ruined.
Right.
So again, it's not so. I'm not trying to say he deserves to get canceled. I'm trying to say it's weird that for some reason I've never seen it happen to him. Like Golden Girls got canceled, but not Steve Martin saying the N-word about 50 times in The Jerk. Like,
right. Or
so it's just weird to me.
But with that said, go ahead. With that said,
with that said, what do you guys think? Let us know. Check us out. We got a whole backlog of episodes. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment. And yeah, until next time, I've been Whiskey.
And I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese. You and your film and your cinematographer both suck it. That was despicable.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Sparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.